Nailing a really good overhead shot in your videos can provide a valuable perspective for your viewers. And I'm going to show you what works well for me, from the setup to the lighting to the camera settings, and maybe even a unique thing or two, all in an effort to provide you with a system to make your overhead shots look more pro. Before we get into all the camera settings and the setup to nail your overhead shot, one thing I found that adds a really nice touch to your overhead shot is how you lay things out to be able to show some of your personal style. You could just do the shot really plain and ultra minimal, which is fine. It's kind of a preference thing here. I like to add a few things to the frame to make it more interesting, and my friends over at Oakeywood, I'll put a link to them down below, have perfect modern and functional desk accessories that look excellent and add a nice dimension to these shots for me. I tend to have them just slightly cut off by the frame on the edges and just add a few so that it doesn't clutter things up too much. Oh, and if you're going to add a few things to your scene, I'd recommend adding at least one thing that has a straight edge. And anytime that you want the thing that you're showing, the main subject, to also be level, use that straight edge as your reference point. That straight edge thing will all make sense when we get into the camera setting section of this video. You don't have to use a desk for your overhead shots, but it's certainly the most common option. Texture and different surface types for desks really comes back to your personal preference, and I've tried a ton of different options, but kind of keep coming back to liking this ultra minimal, really clean white desktop for my overhead stuff. And this one from Uplift Desk is exceptional for two reasons. First, having a desk that you can lift and lower can be a nice feature to provide some flexibility for your frame and really get things dialed in. And the second thing is something that I'm going to be doing a lot more of in this upcoming year. They have this dry erase desk, which we've all seen videos of people on a top-down shot writing on a piece of paper. But with this dry erase desk, you can incorporate writing things directly into your top-down scene. I know, my handwriting never got better after like 7th grade. I'll link this desk down below too, because I'm loving this dry erase feature and incorporating that into my overhead work, and I think you'll like it a lot too. Oh, and I'm curious, what do you use top-down shots for in your videos? Moving into actually setting up our overhead shot, there are really three types of ways to do this. First, you can have a permanent overhead rig, or you could have a desk clamp style tripod, or you could have a floor style overhead tripod. Something like this would be what a permanent overhead rig setup looks like. The benefit to doing a permanent setup like that is if you set it up right, it's usually going to be high enough to where it's not going to be in the frame of your main angle. And why that's important is if you're running your main angle camera and a top-down camera at the same time, you can actually have those clips sync up, so whatever you're showing in your main angle is also showing on your top-down. Anyone who's doing like product walkthroughs or anything where they want to have their main angle perfectly match the top-down and what's going on is going to be using something like this. The downside to a permanent overhead rig setup is that compared to the other two options, they're a lot more expensive. Another option is to use one of these desk-mounted overhead tripods. These used to be my favorite option until I realized that I'm completely incapable of not hitting the desk when I'm doing these shots, and even if you have a super high quality desk like this one from Uplift, the camera will still have some shakes and jitters. So if you're not a caveman like me and you're not going to be pounding on the desk when you're trying to do a top-down shot, these can be really good options. The downside to these is that they'll be in your frame if you're trying to do a main angle talking head shot in sync with a top-down one like what we just talked about. The third option, and one that I've been liking a lot recently and been using myself, is a floor tripod overhead setup. This one is from Small Rig and it is outstanding. It's durable, has plenty of height and horizontal reach, and yeah, it does exactly what you need it to do. Usually with a desk-mounted overhead setup or a floor tripod overhead setup, you'll be filming those clips as B-roll after you do your main angle shot. Oh, and if you're using that floor tripod option, make sure you use a sandbag or a heavy backpack. to hook onto that tripod so that your top-down shot doesn't turn into a broken camera. Unless you want a good excuse to get a new camera. And if you do pick up a new camera, wouldn't it be nice if somebody broke it down and made all this camera stuff really simple and easy to do? I've got your back. Tap that subscribe button down below and let's make it easy. One thing that'll instantly make your overhead shots look a lot more pro is when they're nice and level. Like this shot is okay, but something just feels like a bit lazy or a bit off. Versus this one where we've tightened those lines up and made it a lot more level. Here's how to do that every single time. Most cameras have this level display built in, which is a really useful tool to make your shots level. But unfortunately, when you put the camera in like an orientation to do a top down, these levels and the way they're calibrated aren't going to work. If somebody knows a way around that for Sony cameras, please let me know. But here's what I've been doing to get my shots nice and straight. Once the camera is set up, I just stand to the side of it and just look to make sure that it's pointed straight down with no tilt backwards or forwards. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just eyeballing it and getting really close will work. And then using that straight edge from earlier, if you have a camera that's relatively new over the last like decade, it'll have the ability to turn on guidelines or a grid. And then you can just use those to make sure that that straight edge prop that you have in your shot is actually straight. External monitors can be really helpful here too. They have grid lines or guidelines. It can help you line up that shot as your camera might be too far away to see some of the finer details. I'll link a solid and very affordable option for an external monitor down below. But also do some research because your camera might have an option to use a monitoring app, which those are going to do. They're usually pretty cheap, if not free. Those are going to do the same thing as an external monitor to provide you with something that's not the back of your camera when it's really far away to be able to line things up. And then when it comes to the frame, you're going to want to leave some room on all of the edges of what you think your top-down overall end shot is going to be. Being able to shoot in 4K here, because we're going to kind of zoom and crop in, being able to shoot in 4K can be helpful here to maintain quality, but we're not going to be zooming or cropping in all that much, so it's not mandatory, but it can absolutely be helpful. And then we're just going to crop and level things out in post-production. The first thing we're going to line up comes back to if we didn't nail it when we were looking from the side of the camera to make sure it was pointed straight down, we can actually make some tweaks in post to make that a little bit better. Using a 3D adjustment in your editing software, you're just going to apply that to the clip. I'm using Premiere here, but every editing software is going to have something similar. And then you're just going to adjust the tilt. So if things are kind of falling forwards or backwards, you can just make tiny adjustments to the tilt to line those up a bit. And next, you're going to want to add a guideline, and you're going to put that up against that straight edge prop that you had in the frame. And then we're just going to rotate the clip slightly so that your straight edge is aligned. And then from here, you're probably going to need to crop in a bit. And this is where leaving the room on all the edges is important to be able to get the exact frame you want and have the flexibility to make some of those small tweaks. And then when it comes to setting the aperture or the f-stop in camera, to be safe, I tend to shoot my overhead shots around f8 to make sure that everything is going to be in focus. If you shoot them in something that's maybe a little bit too open, like f1.4, you might run the risk of the item that you're showing, parts of it, especially if it has some like verticality to it, if it's not perfectly flat, which most of them aren't, or if you're moving it a little bit, you're going to run the risk of parts of that maybe not being in focus. From a lens option, I think that having a zoom lens, something like a 24-70, is a really good choice because you're going to be able to make micro adjustments of your actual focal length to dial in the shot and how you want it. The goal for lighting these scenes is pretty straightforward. Make sure the subject is well lit without creating too much glare on the surface. What works well for me is I put a softbox about 45 degrees to either side, and I point that about 45 degrees down and I crank it almost to 100%. Then I just move the light as far back away from the desk as I need to so that the reflection isn't in the way of the shot in any way. Next, I put a tube light on the opposite side of where that softbox is and usually crank that to 100% as well to help fill in some of the shadows that are going to be created from our softbox. And if you do all that and you're realizing that maybe you don't have enough light still, you can add a fill light. Window light in the daytime can be a really good option for this, or you can take a light with a cone reflector and bounce that into the ceiling on full blast, and that will do a lot more than you think to fill some space and light your scene. And if you really want to take an additional measure to preventing any distracting glare on your scene, you might want to look into picking up a circular polarizing filter for your lens. I'll put a link below for my favorite circular polarizing filter. Another link. Sorry for all the links, but I hope it helps you quickly find the best products to nail your overhead shots. What a circular polarizing filter is going to do is it rotates, and as you rotate it, it'll cut out some of the unwanted glare. If you happen to be doing any top-down shots for like tech or phones or tablets or cameras, polarizing filter can be really helpful to get the glare off of the screen and make it a lot more visible and readable. It won't completely eliminate like a really harsh light glare on this really reflective white desk that I'm using, for example, which is where the importance of being able to use the lighting tips we talked about earlier and getting that softbox as far away as possible without creating those distracting glares. But if I was doing an overhead shot on something like this really cool oaky wood black desk, can't get over how cool these oaky wood products are. The polarizers can be really helpful here to eliminate more of that lighting glare than something like that white desk. So now that you've got your top-down shots looking all crispy and pro, what about the rest of your studio? If you want to learn a few more things for how to maximize your space, or a few tips and tricks that are going to help you make your videos look and sound great, I put a studio tour video together where I go through every single inch of my space to provide you with a lot of tips that are probably going to help you a lot. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. See you.